Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the It's the Pictures podcast. I'm your host, Max Colville. This is episode number 226. This week, we will have a special guest, and we'll be talking about the great Batman, the animated series from the early 90s. But before we get there, I'm joined, as always, by my co host, Evan Crean. Hi, Evan.
Hey Max, how's it going?
It's going pretty well. Much better this Sunday at this time than it was going last Sunday
Yeah, you were
after we
battling a stomach
recorded.
bug, huh?
Oh yeah. It was bad.
Yeah, it was. We lucked out with the timing of that.
This weekend at the movie theater, we saw another run of the Odyssey. Right, there wasn't any big movies playing outside of that. They almost made room for it. Right.
Yeah, I mean, there wasn't anything else that was on my radar. I mean, on Spoiler Piece this past week, we talked about The Dink, which is that was a movie that was coming out on Apple TV Plus.
Yeah, that there was that, and I think like the Paramount Plus, like Avatar Aang, like the new Avatar movie that takes place later, and the Last Airbender when they're
That was,
adults.
that was not on my radar. Now I'm gonna have to go watch that.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Which is great because that's another animated series, which will help lead me into our introduction to our guest today. We are joined by Daniel Dockery, who has an upcoming book entitled "I Am the Night," which is about Batman the Animated Series. Welcome, Daniel.
Hey, thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm Daniel Dockery. This is my I Am the Night, the Ultimate Unauthorized History of Batman the Animated Series is my second book. It kind of details the creation of and the impact of Batman the Animated Series, which is, in my opinion, the greatest adventure cartoon ever made. And, when I'm not writing pop culture books, I'm writing in a lot of places on the internet. So yeah, if you've been to like an internet pop culture site, there's a good chance that I've at least like done a feature for them. So
Awesome. Yeah, we Evan and I had a chance to briefly look over the book, and I was pleasantly surprised by what I found within the pages, Daniel. I thought, like, for some reason that would almost be like an episode guide, or that was what I was expecting. But what I found was, you know, a really well thought out analysis of how the animated series kind of came to be and the world that it exists in, and what ended up coming out of the collaboration of all those creatives.
yeah, this I'm sure we'll get to it later, but this book had a lot of different forms on the way to kind of becoming what it is now. But yeah, I'm glad you're enjoying it. It meant a lot for me to write. It meant a lot for me to write a book like you know, a kind of dense history book about like animation because we for the most part books about animation tend to be like art books like
Hmm.
licensed big guides,
Right.
and those are really cool, but to be able to like kind of give Batman the Animated Series the project that I'd seen a lot of like my favorite movies and favorite TV shows get over the years was really, really cool.
Yeah, awesome. Evan, it was funny when the other day I was thinking to myself, what would I put like on the pantheon of like best like comic book to like cartoon a series, and easily Batman the Animated Series would be like way up there, if not number one. But I was
Mm-hmm.
also thinking, the late '90s X-Men series that's seeing a rejuvenation, and then I thought to myself, there was like a '90s Spider-Man cartoon too that was like on Fox that
Yeah,
I kind of dug.
I dug that one too. I've been thinking about giving that one a rewatch.
And then I was like, oh, how could I forget like the Superman, like Max Fleischer cartoons from way back in the day?
Hmm. Yeah.
So, so
Yeah.
those would be like my pantheon of superhero cartoon shows. But now we're gonna move on to the news before we get to our feature on Batman the Animated Series and further with the book. And over the weekend, there was more news on the Paramount Warner Brothers proposed merger. Now it is in postponement till June 1st, 2027, or until otherwise determined. I
TVD.
guess, yeah, Paramount faces a lot of dissension from other places. SAG-AFTRA came out and released a public statement over the weekend that they oppose the merger. I know already, like other big guilds have opposed the merger, and I don't know. I mean, like, some part of me is like they'll probably push it through anyways because this is how like things happen when you get upset about something and like people
Right.
say don't do it, they'll do it anyways. But yeah, it's funny that we're talking about Warner Brothers, right? Because it's just like here we are doing a big Batman episode,
Right.
and
Yeah, we're knee deep in Warner Brothers over here.
is this what you expected, Evan, or did you expect smooth sailing, or you didn't really know what
Well,
to
I
expect?
don't think I expected smooth sailing. It seems like people are just as upset as they were about Netflix potentially acquiring Warner Brothers. But yeah, I guess I was expecting they were just going to push it through anyway. I'm surprised to hear that they're actually delaying the merger so they can try and resolve some of these legal entanglements. That makes sense. Like, okay, we got a lot of other battles to fight before we can get there. I'll be shocked if it doesn't eventually go through, but we'll see. I mean, maybe I'll be pleasantly surprised that it'll get stopped, and maybe Warner Brothers will just be its own company and we'll have more competition, more opportunities for creatives. That would be an ideal world, but I'm trying to be realistic as well.
Daniel, do you have any dogs in this fight, or have you been really an armchair
You know,
spectator?
I in the battle of who gets Warner Brothers, it's really like whoever wins we lose kind of thing, because I know that Paramount and all them are pretty widely disliked. So it doesn't super surprise me that they would get like this kind of pushback. I do wonder how long. I do wonder if it's going to be like sustained because, like, as the past few years have shown, if you want to bring something like back up in court again, you can kind of do that like forever.
Hmm.
They could, easily keep this going until like Paramount is like, fine, we're not interested anymore. Who cares? We're tired of dealing with this. Or they could it could all end in on the exact 2027 date, and then the Warner Brothers library gets moved to like I don't know whatever 9,000 streaming services Paramount has planned to come out of this. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I guess like one of the big arguments that SAG-AFTRA wrote in their a piece, which was signed by Sean Astin, who's now the president of SAG-AFTRA. They were saying like, look at the Disney Fox deal and like how that didn't bring more jobs out there. Any film that you used to be able to pitch to Fox doesn't really meet Disney's purview.
yeah,
So they're like that kind of that loses an avenue where you
yeah,
could possibly pitch that film.
yeah, and it's very I think it's kind of less now, but in like the kind of the golden age of Hollywood, you had like MGM had MGM movies. This is what you went to MGM for, and this is what you
Hmm.
went to Warner Brothers for, and this is what you went to Universal for, and that thing doesn't really exist anymore since I guess since the basically the blockbuster was invented, and everybody was like,
Hmm.
we got to do that. We all got to have a Star Wars now, which is what we've been chasing ever since. Is everybody kind of just wants a Star Wars. But yeah, I think not having even the chance of being like, okay, well, I'll pitch it to Warner Brothers because Warner Brothers kind of likes this, has this taste of material, is a death of countless amazing scripts that will never get made and amazing projects that will never see the light of day. Because the more I think people don't recognize that, and I'm glad Joe brought that up. I think the more that we kind of coagulate all of these companies into one company, the truly the less options we have, and like the less ability we have to kind of craft tastemakers and to craft like studio heads that first of all like movies at all, and second of all have like a kind of specific vision of, okay, our company does this and this is how we differentiate themselves from everyone else. So I
Hmm.
think it's I don't want to I want Hollywood to like kind of thrive and be diverse and stuff, and this is just one more kind of hit to the kneecap of the idea that we can make more than like three kinds of movies.
Hmm.
Yeah, agreed.
No, I agree with you, and I mean it's even someone like yourself who's pitched novels. I'm sure even when it comes time to who you pitch to and what agents,
Yeah,
you'd want more opportunities than fewer.
Yeah, no, my agent has a like an encyclopedic knowledge of like if we're pitching a book, we're like we'll go to this guy because this guy like this editor likes pop culture, but pop culture between like May 1986 to like July 16th, 1992, and this fits right in there, and like that kind of thing. But it's having a such a like a wide array of like editors to pitch to is great because you there's so many people and so many tastes that lean outside of, well, I just want what's popular, or want what's going to be
Hmm.
popular. It's like, okay, does this material speak to me? And that's the same thing kind of with Hollywood having a bunch of different studios and a bunch of different, parent companies of those studios. Is you get a taste that isn't just we want the thing that makes the most money. It's like I want material that I personally want to see on screen. So, yeah,
All right. I'm sure we could certainly talk all episode
yeah.
about
Yeah,
that topic.
that's true.
But we're going to go ahead and give a very brief update on the summer box office game, which we probably won't revisit until the end of the summer at this point. From what I read over the weekend, the Odyssey had a fantastic second weekend. I think I read somewhere that it had like a better second weekend than some of like the Batman movies. With Christopher Nolan, and yeah, it look and some. I think it was like Monday, Evan. Like right after we talked, it was enough for like the Odyssey made enough that day that I was able to finally surpass your total. And everything from this weekend on will probably
Yeah.
we'll probably continue to go in that direction as we're recording this a week early than we normally do. By the time this comes out, this should be the weekend after Spider-Man because I'll probably hold the episode, but you'll
Hmm.
see a pretty big jump in score. I'm like score box office change,
Right.
and we can just revisit that at the end of the summer. Evan, is there anything particularly surprising to you about the Odyssey's success? And obviously we both picked it too low. I mean, this is now it's like the third or fourth best movie of the summer.
Yeah, I mean, it's Christopher Nolan, so I had a suspicion it would do well. But I'm like, how I know people are motivated to go see Christopher Nolan movies, but like, how motivated are they to see this, like in Sword and Sandals epic style movie that he's making? I guess they're interested.
Pretty darn interested. Yeah, so the Odyssey has been doing pretty darn well, despite any words from the denizens on X and all of those people who would make you believe that the Odyssey isn't doing well or that the numbers are fake.
There must be the same people that are upset about Elliot Page playing Achilles, which Elliot Page is not.
Yeah. And then over the weekend, we had San Diego Comic Con, and why this news will be a little bit old by the time you hear it. Marvel was in town. They reaffirmed their commitment with Ryan Coogler for Panther 3, and they said David Johnson is the new Black Panther. I've seen David Johnson in this like I think it's like this like European comedy called like Rye Lane that was like on
Oh, I love that
Amazon Prime
movie.
Video. Yeah, it's hilarious.
Yeah, it's a great rom com.
So, but I didn't really know him from like Alien Romulus or like I guess he was in The Long Walk more recently.
Hmm.
But no, I from what I've seen of him, I think that's a great choice, and I think that will be good. And I think Ryan Coogler has excitement based on his name that exceeds what Marvel is at this point.
Yeah. I mean, I think I was surprised by that news because I'm like, did they say why what's her name is not going to be continue to be Black
No.
Panther? They're just like, we got a new Black Panther. Here you go, people.
Yeah, well, it's like at the end of Wakanda Forever, it's kind of hinted like, oh, he had a son, so they're like, oh, that we can pass on the mantle. I hope that they like lean into this idea that like almost anybody could be Black Panther if they want
Yeah.
to, similar to like what people connected to with the Last Jedi, because I think that'd be more powerful than just saying, all right, we need another guy to be Black Panther.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Did you do Marvel news, Daniel? Do you have any
I
thoughts on?
I mean, like, I like Ryan Coogler, and like, it's hard for me to care about like anything with the MCU. Like, I don't know. I've never been like a big MCU guy, even like doing like, and I don't want to sound like, well, my tastes are refined. I only like Batman cartoons, but it's been, every once in a while I see a project that I'm like, oh, that'd be really cool, but I'm sure it's gonna be. I'm sure it's going to be good. I mean, it's Ryan Coogler, so I'm sure it's going to be at least like watchable. I'm probably not going to like go like run out to see it, but I'm glad that he's gotten to a point where as you said, his name is bigger than the kind of MCU itself right now, because that doesn't happen for every director. A lot of directors kind of like toil in these like Marvel mines, and then they go off and they like do another kind of forgettable blockbuster. But I'm glad that there's guys that have worked in modern days like Coogler and Nolan that can use this to like dip in and out of like blockbuster filmmaking, but essentially get like a blank check for any project they want these days. And it couldn't have happened to you know more singular filmmakers with like very very specific visions of like what they want. So I'm more power to them. I'm more interested in Coogler's post Black Panther 3 project
Sure.
than this, but I'm sure it's going to be like better than Thor 2, like.
Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
you know so more power to him if he likes doing it, and like Marvel gives him like creative freedom, and like the next studio comes in and is like, we'll let you make whatever you want. Great, that's awesome.
Right, and then there was news that Ryan Gosling is joining the MCU as Ghost Rider. Their like 18th attempt to make Ghost Rider work. this this time with director Sean Levy, who is also the director of the Star Wars Starfighter. So Gosling and him will be teaming up for a different movie.
Mm.
There were lots of TV trailers, including first looks at Apple TV Plus's Neuromancer adaptation of
Mhm.
the famous science fiction novel, HBO's new series Lanterns, which is based on the Green Lantern, which actually looks pretty darn good. I couldn't imagine they'd ever get Green Lantern right, but that looks kind of interesting. More Rings of Power, the Lord of the Rings series that Amazon spent $1 billion on that nobody's watching, and lots of other things. But before even San Diego Comic Con kind of fully kicked off, there were some great horror trailers. I was surprised that like they both hit at the same time. First was like Zach Krieger's Resident Evil trailer, which looks pretty great, even though it doesn't seem to be based on characters from the game. It seems like most certainly like Raccoon City and like being in that area, and he has his pulse on what Resident Evil is.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at the trailer with all the nods to the game with shotguns, shells, and typewriters and what have you. That looked pretty cool. But specifically, I wanted to bring up is the new trailer for Clayface, which premiered in when we just had Supergirl come out in theaters. That was very clearly like the next project in the James Gunn DC universe, where like Clayface almost looks like it exists as its own thing, like sort of like how the Joker did, like because it's very dark. It seems like it's more concerned with like this like body horror angle, and like it's almost using Clayface as a character to tell this really engaging story. And you know, Clayface's origin is not exact from what we see in the trailer, but it has a new interesting wrinkles to it. Daniel, I was wondering if you had a chance to check out the trailer, if you had any thoughts on it.
I did, and I'm looking forward to it. I like the idea of doing Clayface as kind of like a Shudder original movie.
Yeah.
And I think that's pretty neat. And I again the Matt disfigured Hollywood actor that like has to that uses his like new experimental thing and becomes Clayface is like right out of Batman the Animated Series, it's the plotline used for that version of Clayface. So I'm excited about that. I am wondering like just how deep they're going to go. First of all, two things. First of all, I'm kind of excited to see how if they weave it into like a wider thing, because I know they want to put like Batman in this DC universe at some point.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering if it's gonna be like if it's gonna be like the Peacemaker cameo in Superman, where it's like he's like on TV, or whatever, or if they have just like a newspaper floats by that's just like Batman saves the day again or whatever, and we're like, oh, Batman's here,
The
yeah,
Batman.
that's
Hmm.
it's the guy. And the second thing is they have that scene in the trailer where he pulls out like the
Yeah,
gar
scissors.
basically the thread cutting garment scissors,
Hmm.
when it looks like he's about to like clip his eyes, and I'm like, how deep is this gonna go? Like, because first of all, like on one hand he's like clay. He's is it just like, is it gonna be like in the cartoon where you just like you can like kind of slice him in half and it's like just like brown mold, or is it like, is it going to be like viscous human flesh and all and stuff? I'm interested in that. I think that's gonna really change the game from like good kind of gross to like really good kind of gross. So I'm excited. I mean, I'm excited for it. Again, I'm a big horror guy. Horror is kind of my go-to genre, and I'm excited for that. I was really excited for the Resident Evil movie.
Mm,
I that they have that shot. I love the shotgun shells,
yeah.
that kind of thing. But like when he looks outside and he sees like the woman he hit with the car like running down the path toward him, like that is such like, in prior Resident Evil movies, like it was mostly based around like the horde of like CGI zombies like coming at you and stuff,
Yeah.
and it was all built around that. But that is such like a I had such a visceral reaction to that shot. It's such like a nightmare shot where if you like it feels like a bad dream, and I'm like, oh, I think this movie might be pretty good based on stuff like that. Krieger's a good director, but I'm excited to see, you know, if the movie kind of goes bananas as it goes along, or if it's like, if he plays it close to his chest and tries to like just kind of do like first game survival horror sections. So we'll see. I'm excited for it.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you mentioned Batman before I pass it back to Evan, is because like James Gunn has said in the past that Robert Pattinson is not his Batman for his like DC universe, that like what Matt Reeves is doing with Patterson is like totally outside of his plans. So most certainly we do have to see another Batman project happen concurrently with Matt Reeves, the Batman 2 that might come out while we're all still alive.
One of these days, right?
Yeah, 'cause, like Robert Pattinson started as like young Batman, but now he's gonna be like Ben Affleck Batman in the new one. Evan, did you catch any of these horror movie trailers from over the weekend?
No, I didn't get a chance to, but they sound really good. I mean, Zach Krager making a Resident Evil movie. I'm on board with that. I really liked weapons, and this Clayface is sounding more and more interesting to me based on your description, Daniel. It
Yeah, I
sounds
think
pretty freaking creepy.
hopefully
Yeah,
it's good. I really hope it's good. There are like, again, as with everything, there's like 10,000 ways it could not be good. But
Right.
like I'm choosing to hold out hope for Clayface. So
awesome. And at least, Warner Brothers didn't go the way of trying to send it to Venice like they did with Joker Part 2 and have it canned at Venice and then essentially be DOA after that. So yeah, well, hopefully it does well. But now that we've talked about Clayface, it's a perfect time to transition into our featured topic today. Again, we are joined with Daniel, and we're going to delve into Batman the Animated Series and his book, I Am the Night, and, you know, talk some of this great series that it's funny when I was watching it, just I watched a few episodes before our conversation, and I'm like, oh, there's like an option here to like skip the intro. I was like, how on earth could you skip the intro? Everything about the intro to a episode of Batman the Animated Series is just like infinitely memorable.
hmm
I think like what and so like I wanted to start with some of our early memories with Batman the animated series, because I imagine that all three of us aren't old enough to say that we were in our 20s when that came out. We're probably all youngins when Batman the animated series hit the airways in the early 90s.
hmm
And Daniel, what was like your earliest memory of Batman the Animated Series? Was it something that like you found playing on TV, or were you like eagerly anticipating this Batman cartoon?
So, like, luckily for like somebody that would become like a pop culture writer, like my parents weren't really like strict about like the amount of like TV. Like, I just like if there was stuff to do, like we'd go do it. But for like if I wanted to watch TV, it was just like fine, go. It doesn't matter.
Hmm.
TV can be cool. We like movies, so I watched a lot of cartoons growing up, and so many of the like theme songs and like weird episode plot lines are kind of lodged in my cerebellum somewhere. But with Batman the Animated Series, my first memory, I was very young, and it's not an episode, but back during its early Fox Kids run, when it would play on like weekday afternoons, they would have this preview for the next episode. And it would be done in like spiral, like to the screen, like newspaper
Mm.
fashion,
Hmm.
and like that mid-Atlantic like reporter voice would play like tomorrow on Batman, ruthless mobsters attack Gotham City, and like they would like do that, and that like the actual episode plot lines I remember kind of experiencing later on, but that is my first Batman the Animated Series memory. And that stuck out because there was a lot of like obviously a lot of shows had like episode previews, like X-Men at the time was like previously on X-Men,
Hmm.
but the like just like the newspaper reporting, and also the fact that it was just like it didn't shy away from being like like they would say like ruthless terrorists plan to kill all of Gotham City, and I'm like a little kid, I'm like that's about 4 words. I have no idea what that means.
Yeah.
I think it was the first time I'd ever heard the word. I think the first episode preview includes like is about like terrorists, and I'm like, okay, If I was like, if I was a child seeing that, I'd be like, sure, man, whatever. I don't know. I don't know what any of that means, but it looks pretty cool. But that's my first Batman animated series memory. Is not the show itself. I'd get a bigger memory of the show itself later on, but for previews because they were so striking and so entirely unlike anything else I was experiencing, like just my mind numbing out in front of television.
Now, Evan, do you have like a specific like episode or scene, or was there something at large? Because I know for me it was something more at large.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the atmosphere
Hmm.
that Daniel's describing in his book, like coming off of the Tim Burton Batman and Batman being very like present in the culture in like the late '80s and the early '90s between Tim Burton and then the later in the '90s like the other movies, the Joel Schumacher Batman movies. Batman was pretty top of mind. Of course, I had like all the Batman toys and the Batmobile, and I remember watching Batman the animated series being a very like natural outgrowth of that, like being interested in Batman in general. And I remember thinking this is really good. Like, I remember getting really invested. Of course, the intro is very memorable. And I mean, I think I'll always think of Batman the animated series as well by way of Batman Mask of the Phantasm, which I think I remember my dad taking me to see in the movie theater and thinking, "Oh man, this is really good." And then like a few years ago when they put out the 4K release, I bought it and I sat down and watched it with my wife, and she has seen some Batman stuff here and there, but she was like, "Damn, that was really good." Like,
Yeah.
yeah, it is. It is really good.
No, that was a great movie, and like I wanted to preface though that like it was for me. I think it's not necessarily an episode either. It's probably like Mark Hamill's performance as the Joker,
Yeah.
or like Kevin Conroy as Batman. Like those are like the voices I've always attached to those characters. And
Hmm.
I guess when I went back, because I was much too young to watch the first Tim Burton Batman when it came out, and I saw Jack Nicholson try to do the Joker, and it just felt so odd because like I had grown into that Mark Hamill like Joker performance, and like it's I know like people say like they have their bonds, and like this is certainly my like Batman and Joker.
Yeah, for sure. Like I remember
Mhm.
that persisting too, like later when Batman Beyond came out, and I remember watching that and loving the tie-in and having, the Kevin Conroy, like old Bruce Wayne be connected to that as well.
Hmm.
I think it's I think a lot of people call like Kevin Conroy their Batman, but he's it's very hard like not to hear him and not to hear like the spectrum that he grants like Batman and Bruce Wayne and everything in between, and it's
Yeah.
so hard not to like go into like reading comics later and just like that voice fits every
Mhm.
single like incarnation of Batman. It's the voice I hear when I like read comics.
Yeah, and I remember that being such a big selling point for the studio Rocksteady's Batman Arkham games was like
Mm.
they had those voices in there.
Mhm.
But yeah, Daniel, I want to hear more about the genesis of I Am the Night, where you got the idea, or what was your first pitch on like, hey, I really love Batman the animated series. I think it's important, and this is why I want to write about
I had just gotten done with I knew I kind of wanted to write a superhero book, and I was, for a long time, my big superhero love since childhood had been either Batman or Spider-Man. With Spider-Man, I couldn't quite figure out like a story that would like that held my attention, because if when you're writing like a nonfiction book, I think you have to be prepared to at least like, am I gonna like be okay with like obsessing over this subject for at least 2 years? Like all of my extra thoughts will be devoted to this, and if you say yes, then I think you're probably apt for it. If you say no, then move on to something else. I couldn't find something with that with Spider-Man. I found something with Batman. I had an entire different Batman project kind of going, and it kind of didn't go anywhere. And so I went to my agent, and my agent was like, "Okay, let's do another topic, because I know there's a few other topics that you want to write about." And I was like, "Well, I'm still kind of geared up about Batman, and if I
it.
don't, I told him, I was like, if I don't do a Batman book now, I don't think I'm ever gonna want to, because I'm kind of, all of my chips are in the pushed in the table about Batman right now." And he goes, "Okay, what about?" And I was like, "The history of Batman the Animated Series." And he was like, "I've never watched Batman the Animated Series." And I was like, "Great."
Here's some homework. Go
I'm
watch it
just,
and come back, and then we'll talk.
so I just was like, the big thing was kind of selling him on it as like a subject that would make for like a good book, like a good book with like, you know, even though it's nonfiction, a movie with like characters and kind of an A to B arc, and like, a real deep dive into like the legacy of something and the impact in a way that's like kind of nostalgic but also surprising, and like analytical but also like embraces it.
Hmm.
So yeah, and so I wrote that, and luckily enough, my editor at St. Martin's Press was like, "I love Batman the Animated Series, so I will absolutely read this." And he did, and luckily enough, I don't know how often um I can only imagine that with the series like this enormously beloved, that there's been other people that have like pitched similar books. So I feel very like gratified that I'm getting the chance to do it, especially in like this kind of specific format. But yeah, that was kind of how it kind of the origins of I Am the Night is just, me saying like I think I think I still want to write a Batman book. I'm not done with Batman yet.
Hmm.
And luckily enough, like I was able to, get my agent on board. I still have no idea if he's seen an episode of Batman the Animated Series. And my editor, who is a big fan of Batman the Animated Series, and a bunch of people that work with the team, and that's one of the other really cool things is, it takes a lot of people to kind of work in a book. It doesn't just not just the author, it's the agent and the editor and the marketing team at the publishing house, and everybody that works with like acquisitions, and people that work with the audiobook, and people that work, even just like people that like do the cover, or help with aligning the printing or copy editing. I got so many
Hmm.
cool messages from people being like, "Hey Daniel, I'm doing this with the book. I love Batman the Animated Series." And that you rarely get people, first of all, that have that kind of adoration for like a cartoon, especially a bunch of like professional adults. So it's been a really cool process from like start to finish. And I think, if I will be surprised if I ever have a book project that goes as joyfully as this one has from kind of start to finish.
Right, and I'm sure we won't, but I'm sure we could pick like maybe like a handful of animated series that would come anywhere close to
Yeah,
that iteration that have.
I mean, you have like if you're thinking about like because one of the things about Batman the animated series, and I talk about this, is that it's kind of unassailable in the cycles of pop culture. Like we've never gone through an era where we're like, okay, it sucks now, because that happens to everything, even like the most beloved. Like I remember we had for a little while probably the most outright beloved like Batman film is probably The Dark Knight, if only because of like the gigantic cultural impact it had. But even
Mm-hmm.
among like a large amount of like film buffs, like about 10 years after it came out, everyone kind of came back to it and was like, does it suck though? I don't
Yeah.
know if
Is it
it
not as good
does.
as I remember it?
Is it not as good as I remember? I remember, because you rewatch those Christopher Nolan movies, and especially when you compare them to like what Marvel was pumping out, they feel like they're from a different universe. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and so that happens with superhero films a lot as they go through like this cycle of like in blockbuster films in general, it's like, okay, they suck. And then 5 years later, they're like, actually, they were underrated. They're an underrated masterpiece, and it just cycles through and through. But Batman the Animated Series, from like sun up to sundown, it has been just a everyone has agreed like this is Batman. This is good. This is one of the good ones.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
Was there anyone in particular that you were super excited to interview in the course of putting the book together? I'm sure I like I said, I didn't get a chance to read through the whole book, so I don't know like who you were able to reach out to from the team that put the series together. So
you know, as with my first book, it was like 99% of the people were so good to talk to and like so nice and so like open with their time and open with their memories and willing to like kind of go back and forth about like what they felt about the series and what they added to it. And out of everybody that I was super excited to talk to, I don't know. There was a there's a picture of there's an old picture of like the four kind of, I guess, not necessarily creators of Batman the Animated Series, but four people who were heavily involved in getting it on television in the quality that it was. And there were co-creators Bruce Timm and Eric Radomski. There was their kind of executive higher up, Gene McCurdy, who was really involved in getting kind of this Warner Brothers television renaissance off the ground and was really supportive of creators being allowed to kind of create and do the job that they're good at, and cartoonists being allowed to kind of push the boundary a little bit and not necessarily be forced to adjust to like what had been successful before, but be like, okay, what are the cartoons that you want to see? And then there was Alan Burnett, who was like who eventually became like the third producer and kind of in the overall story editor of the show. And I managed to speak to two of them. It was Eric Radomski and Alan Burnett. And so I was so happy when they agreed to talk to me, because they're such like wells of knowledge. Like Eric Radomski was kind of responsible for the fact that Batman the Animated Series was drawn on black paper,
Mm.
or was animated on black paper, which if you look at the history of animation on a black canvas, it's usually only used, you'll find it mostly in like experimental stuff,
Mm.
like white lines or like kind of odd things you do with color, because the lighting gets really weird. And I remember there's a quote in an old magazine where Bruce Timm was like, I didn't really want to do black paper first because I thought it would look like an Elvis painting.
hmm.
If you remember like old Elvis paintings, that like the airbrush on like the black fabric, and they just kind of like they kind of look uncanny in a way. But he was very big proponent, and like he gave basically like a masterclass of like how you get stuff to show up on like a backdrop, and like how specifically, and a lot of this didn't make it into the book, but like how specifically you use like different shades of color to be like, okay, if you want lighting to this degree, you got to use this much, and like that kind of stuff. And then Alan Burnett, told me about stories. And then after I was done, I got an email from him with like a 3-page bullet point guide of his key to good cartoon writing.
Hmm.
And he was like, I didn't feel like I explained this well enough. So he sent it to me. And it was down to like a character should say this many lines, and you should not hold the camera, or should not have a zoom in, or like you should not have a close up on an animated face for this many seconds before you move. And you shouldn't move the camera this much before you start overworking the animators and stuff. And it was so like practical, but also so much like, Huh, okay. Because, you know, and just like them taking the time to like do that and explain that stuff to me was as good as like any like behind the scenes in depth like production story. So those were two of the people that I was really excited to. But of course, like so many people involved that worked on Word of Jim to talk to. So,
So while we're into talking about Batman as a show, obviously there was a lot of animated shows in the early 90s that were quite different than
hmm
Batman the Animated Series.
hmm
I remember, outside of growing up with that, I grew up with a strong diet of Darkwing Duck and
hmm
Tailspin
yep,
and Chippendale Rescue
the
Rangers.
Disney
Yeah.
afternoon.
Yeah,
Yep.
this is very different than that. I mean,
hmm
Darkwing Duck was basically light Batman.
hmm It was, yeah, I dive into that a little bit, or not, probably I try to use it as like a framework for kind of what was going on in animation. And there was a lot of people that worked on both. Like Alan Burnett, before he came on to work with Batman, he was working. He had written some like Ducktales. He wrote like the Ducktales movie, and then he went on to like write a big chunk of like Mask of the Phantasm, two very different projects. But it's the Disney afternoon. Like obviously, it's a little more like saccharine than you'll find on like Batman the Animated Series. But back then, it was just so like amazing to see like TV animation being granted like a budget and like a budget that was like reflected on screen. Because if you
Mm-hmm.
go back and like watch like old episodes of, again, like watch Darkwing Duck or watch like Chip and Dale and watch kind of like the fluidity of the movement and stuff, and then you like look at like something made just like a decade earlier that's kind of trying to get the same demographic, and it's basically like, it it does not have the same like fluidity of movement. It doesn't have the same like orchestral sound. It doesn't have the same like fullness of like sort of like the cinematic quality to it. And I go into the biggest Disney stuff I talk about is I have a section devoted to gargoyles,
Mm-hmm.
which
Gargoyles.
I was another big fan of, and I was really glad to talk to a lot of people involved with that show and kind of like how did it connect and kind of clash with Batman the Animated Series. But yeah, there was so much stuff going on at the time, and like even Warner Brothers was doing like Tiny Toon Adventures and like Animaniacs, and
Yeah, I
there
was
was
glad you brought those up in the book because I
yeah,
remember watching those shows and forgetting that they were kind of part of that extended Warner Brothers animated world that also were shows that I was like into and watched.
yeah, there's there was just so much good stuff, and that's not even counting like, the movies that were going on, and like it was the burgeoning like direct to video market. So like I
Mm-hmm.
feel like I think everybody had you know a copy of like Return of Jafar,
Yeah.
like all that kind of stuff, and that like did not exist like 10 years prior, at least not to that degree. But all of a sudden, people were like, we can get them coming and going. Like they watch the show on TV, and then they watch the thing in the theater. Disney did this a lot with like did like an Aladdin cartoon and all this stuff, where they watch them in the theater, and then they watch the cartoon, and then they watch the next movie on the VHS that their parents buy them at like Kmart. So it was, yeah. So anyway, that's a long-winded way to say that it was a very diverse time for cartoons, and a lot of people had put kind of unprecedented cash into an area that, for the most part, they were just like, they're in it for the cereal commercials. So,
Right, and I saw like another interview you did recently, and you very specifically pointed out that Batman the Animated Series was a children's show. It wasn't
hmm
specifically targeting adults. I think like another show like I grew up with was Ren and Stimpy, and that one kind of towed the line too, because obviously it was on Nickelodeon. They weren't really an adult show, but they were also showing it at 9:30 at night on a Saturday. So where do you think like Batman the Animated Series kind of like exists in a world that just like they know that children can handle stuff that is a little bit more serious and not be totally frightened by it, or um, that gave them a little bit of room to experiment.
I think it's always kind of I think if you know where to like kind of put the line is, like kids kind of like, when you were growing up, you wanted to watch TV shows and movies that were seemed a little bit out of your reach. Like kids like being scared like a little bit. They like it.
Mm-hmm.
we're like attracted to like roller coasters and everything. We like being scared. Like there's obviously you don't want to. The kids don't necessarily like being like creeped out. Like if you have ever seen like an adult be like sarcastic with like a 3-year-old, and like, why are you doing that? That's weird. That's creepy. Don't do that. But if you because it's you're trying to like outsmart a 3-year-old. But if you present like a story that can be enjoyed as a story and not as a story specifically made for like young kids or sports, you create stories and you can be done with the broad strokes of a weekday afternoon cartoon or a superhero tale. If you do that and you kind of meet kids at their level where they aspire to watch things that they feel are not necessarily made for grown-ups, but they aspire for stuff that makes them feel good. It empowers them. If you do that, you can like with Batman the Animated Series, you will have fans forever. And there's a lot of cartoons since then that have done that. Like if you watch, like you mentioned, like Avatar: The Last Airbender, it
Yes.
gets a lot out of basically doing these plots. And again, they do it in the broad strokes of a Nickelodeon adventure show,
Hmm.
but they do it in a manner where they're like, okay, you'll appreciate the little bits of nuance and singularity that we're adding to this. And people who were into that show when it first came out 20 years later are still super into it, just like they're into Batman the Animated Series. So I think it's, I think you can, if you set out to make a kid's cartoon that's like okay, we're gonna make this for 4-year olds, it's probably not gonna have a very long shelf life. But if you set out
Hmm.
to make something that first of all, you'll enjoy as like the adult making it, but that the kind of cartoon that you would have wanted to see as a kid, again, that sets you up for 30 years later, you sitting at like a convention booth and people being like, this cartoon changed my life. So yeah, I think all kids kind of like to be scared, or I guess thrilled is a better word. They like to kind of have like the wind in their hair a little bit. They kind of they like the roller coaster idea of like, you're going to go through a Batman adventure that's going to be equal parts like exciting and kind of heartfelt and like maybe like emotionally big and sad and wonderful. But by the time you end of it, you're going to get off the roller coaster and be like, man, I'm going to come back this time tomorrow and watch the next episode. So I think that's kind of the sweet spot for a cartoon that you want to be remembered.
Evan, before we get into like more of the minutia of the characters of Batman the Animated Series and some of the episodes, did you have any particular questions that you wanted to ask Daniel in addition to what I've already asked?
No, no. Let's start digging more into the show.
Okay. So I wanted to talk to you, Daniel, because we have here Feet of Clay Part 1 and 2 on Clayface, and we talked about the Clayface trailer. I want to like talk about some characters that were transformed or made for Batman the Animated Series that like have stood the test of time,
Hmm.
like stuff that like we had the Joker, we had the Riddler from years and years of comic books, and also from the fascinating and fun live action Batman series that aired for quite a number of years. Were there ones like were there ones that stood out to you and maybe like you feel like this kind of adaptation of their characters is like what has been their character going forward?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of that Batman the Animated Series kind of redefined how we saw them. And even if the comics didn't exactly take from them like as directly as, for example, like before Heart of Ice, the Mr. Freeze debut episode,
Hmm.
Mr. Freeze is just kind of like a guy that liked the snow. Like that was his big
Hmm.
thing. Like he had like every once in a while he had like some plot lines of like, I'm going to make snow zombies, and we're like, good for you, dog.
Yeah,
But
like the Arnold Mr. Freeze from
yeah, but after Heart of Ice came in, and they basically had Paul Dini, the guy who wrote Heart of Ice, come in and rewrite like Mr. Freeze's origin. There are a few that are that direct, but if you look at a lot of kind of the assumed origins of characters, a lot of them are kind of have been whittled down a little bit to be more, they have more immediate effectiveness of like Batman the Animated Series, like, like Mad Hatter is a character that's like you kind of see the Batman the Animated Series version of him. There's a I could go
No,
into it. I could go into it like really in depth, but I think one of Batman is basically in general one of Batman's biggest impact on comics is that you had these kind of, if you had any character who was like had this kind of like labyrinthian like backstory, a lot of times in the comics you could watch them do this after Batman series came out. They would kind of like whittle it down a little bit so that if you'd seen Batman the Animated Series, you could just kind of like get the character going forward. So yeah, that was a big impact. Is that it was very it had a very big impact on the comics in that way. And I think every once in a while, y'all mentioned the Arkham Asylum games earlier. I think one of the reasons that Arkham Asylum games thrive is that they're almost like unofficial sequels. Like everything that you watch or everything that you play in those games, like if they kind of assume that you've seen Batman the Animated Series, and you're like, yeah, they get it. So for the most part, so yeah.
no, and like I thought it was like it was weird when I like when say going back to Christopher Nolan, he picked like Scarecrow, right, as like his big badge for Batman Begins, alongside Ra's al Ghul, and like I feel like both those characters are really like, at least my reference point was definitely Batman animated series. It wasn't them from the comics. It
Yeah.
was like,
Well, I think, it's also like it's also coming during like the 90s, which if there's any event that or anything that typified the 90s, it was like convoluted storytelling where you'd be like you have to read this issue and then this separate issue, then this separate issue, then this separate issue to kind of get it. And to have like a comic book, or not a comic but an animated series, be like, hey, you can watch this 22-minute episode and you get this
yeah.
character.
Hmm.
That was super helpful, and I think it created a lot of Batman fans that later migrated to the comics. So yeah, and especially because like Ra's al Ghul had never been on television before. He'd never,
Hmm.
that was his first time on TV. And then like Scarecrow had been in like the Super Friends, but it was the first time that he'd been like the Super Friends like franchise, but this is the first time that he'd been like a threat. And like I think it was like there was a few characters like that was their first time on television. So yeah, when people first saw Ra's al Ghul in Batman the series, that became their Ra's al Ghul.
Hmm.
Even to this day. So
Yeah, and certainly Batman, among pretty much every superhero outside of maybe Spider-Man, has the best like rogues gallery.
mhm.
Because like I could name you 25 Batman villains, but like anybody else, I mean, maybe I could name you one Iron Man villain.
Mhm.
It's like it just doesn't ring true to me. Whereas like Batman is just like so many that come to my mind. Evan, is it kind of the same for you, where your earliest memories of a lot of these villains were from the Batman animated series?
Yeah, absolutely. There's very iconic representations of them. And so you could see how the show, could influence comics as well. Like the storylines from the show kind of bleeding into stuff that they would want to do in the comics, or maybe, updates to some of the representations after, people are seeing these characters and enjoying them in the show. But yeah, I'm struggling to think of other heroes where I can think of as many villains. Spider-Man might come close, partially because I, did watch the 90s animated series, but also my daughter is currently obsessed with Spider-Man because of like the Spidey and Amazing Friends show. So I
Yeah.
feel like we're
Mhm.
reading a lot of like Spider-Man stuff, and she'll be like, "Who's that? Who's that? Who's that?" And I'm just like, "Okay, that's Venom, that's Rhino, that's so and so." It's like you're naming off all the villains from Spider-Man.
No, and like part of the fun of those Arkham games, we're seeing some villains that like never get the time of day, like Calendar Man, right?
Mhm.
So it was fun to see them in that way. I know that the show also got to explore other relationships between the villains that the movies would never make time for. Like there was this great episode with Harley and Poison Ivy,
Mhm.
and made them like girl pals, right?
Mhm.
And Like they have a day out on the town. Harley's like, I'm ready to kiss Joker goodbye. He's done me wrong for the last time, and it's become like so synonymous with that pairing that they ended up having a whole Harley Quinn show, like based on that episode, right? Like the what was it, like the 5 season HBO Max cartoon that came out on Harley Quinn.
Yeah, it's I Harley Quinn kind of like grows throughout the series, and I think when we look back at the series, we kind of imagine it very early in like Harley's kind of like creative evolution, because when she was basically the Joker's kind of like gun mall, and over time, and I talked to Paul Dini about this, and over time, he for the first few episodes you have Harley Quinn, Joker just is so mean to her, like
Mm.
24/7, and he was very open about the fact that he kind of felt bad about that, and he was like, what if we like kind of like let her do her own thing, or like slowly start to like break out of this cycle that she has with the Joker of like he's mean to her, and then inevitably comes back, and like Harley and Ivy ends with Harley like kind of like going back to him. But one of the last episodes of Batman Animated Series is an episode called Harley's Holiday, in which Harley like gets Joker's not even in it,
Mm.
and she gets to kind of have like this like adventure by herself, or as like the lone super villain out on the town, like trying to make good and prove that she's like, you know, cured or whatever. And but it's she has a whole kind of like arc, and then to see her pairing with like Poison Ivy jump from that show into like maybe the defining partnership of her like life, even more than like the Joker, has been really speaks to the power of the series, and like how they created this kind of probably the most famous modern comic book character. I think it would be either Harley Quinn or Venom would be the
Yeah.
most, I would say, the most famous modern comic book villain invented, maybe in the past, like since like the mid '80s, probably.
Yeah, for sure. And I probably watched it during its original run, but for our conversation, I rewatched the animated series episode, "The Man Who Killed
Hmm.
Batman." That one's really fun. It has all the classic noir trappings that the series is known for, and Batman's actually in it very little.
Mhm.
He's supposedly presumed dead by this mobster who just got lucky to kill the Batman. And it goes into like, you know, he feels like he's on top of the town for quite a while, but then he learns that once he meets up with the Joker, Joker's kind of disappointed because has been popularized in the Batman anime series. Like Batman is like the yin to the yang of Joker. Like they exist in like a mirror image of each other, and it's almost like Joker lost his soulmate to this like lowly
This like
guy.
goon, yeah, he was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really like the idea. Like he's such a victim of his own vanity, and such like a weird creature that he's he's sad that Batman died, but like he's more sad that it was like this like unflamboyant, untheatrical like nobody that was the one to
Mm.
like do it, and like not him. So yeah, I've always liked that detail. I've always loved like that sheer amount of like vanity that he has in that show, of just like he wants to be like Gotham's leading man. He needs to do that, and like by somebody else killing Batman, he's like, no, you do not deserve to have killed Batman. I'm the guy. That's like my job. So
That was fun rewatch. We've certainly mentioned some of my favorite episodes, but you had mentioned the Mad Hatter earlier, and the Perchance to Dream episode
mm,
is also one of my favorites. And I love like that like alternate life of Bruce Wayne Batman.
yeah, I think that's a really really cool episode, because it kind of presents this idea of Batman being sort of like an inevitable fixed point, like in like I guess even like it doesn't really explore like the timelines, but as this kind of like there is no timeline for Bruce outside of being Batman. Like he's like, if you watch the episode, like he's very happy. He's kind of weirded out, then he becomes very happy about it and like tries to do it, but he keeps being troubled by this nagging kind of like purpose that's kind of screeching in the back of his head of like, this is not right, this is all wrong, something about this
Hmm.
is wrong, and it's revealed to be kind of this elaborate dream machine induced trance caused by the Mad Hatter. But yeah, I really like the idea that kind of explores Batman as like this like higher purpose and like this huge thing, this huge inevitability, a destiny for him that he's never going to escape, and that really makes it kind of tragic because he gets everything, as Mad Hatter puts it at the end, like everything he could have wanted, you know, but he can't not be Batman now. There's never a reality where he's not Batman now.
Hmm.
So I think that's super interesting and like a little bit more than a little bit bittersweet. But yeah, I really like that episode, and it's got really good writing. It's a really great way to kind of like tease out and slowly unravel a plot line. So yeah, I really enjoy it.
It's kind of funny too, for me at least. It's like I understand the great Christmas classic, "It's a Wonderful Life," and episodes like this kind of like capture that kind of same face
Hmm.
of like, oh, what would life be without you, or how would life change? And I also think like one of the best Next Generation episodes. I know we were talking about Star Trek before we took on, was like the Inner Light. I really like with Picard, and he's like experiencing this other life, and you get to the end of the episode, he's like, oh, he would have really, maybe he would have like loved having that other life or that other experience. That was just because like it was like a dream nebula, a thing that was going on, and I don't know. I find that kind of plot device really fascinating.
Mm. Yeah, me too.
Evan, is there episodes that you remember, or you said you were rewatching some of it that you feel particularly strong about that you want to mention here?
I haven't watched it as recently, so specific episodes are kind of escaping me. I just went back to and I started watching from the beginning, and I made it
Hmm.
like through like, the first couple of episodes. The first, I don't know if it was like this when it originally aired, but like what I was watching on HBO was like a two-parter on Catwoman. I don't know if those were originally like one long episode or two. It seemed like there were some differences when I was like trying to look up the episode logs on like something like IMDb.
Yeah,
Well, Daniel can
there's
tell us, right? Because they aired
there's
it from like a production
there's a
way and a
there's a
real.
there's a broadcast order and a production order, and
Mm.
there's also, I think, the order on HBO Max is different as well.
Hmm.
So it's
I don't
kind
think
of
they have all the seasons either. I think they only have
no.
like 3 out of the 4 seasons or something.
I think I don't know. I when like whenever I watch Batman the Animated Series, I have like the most like recent, like the big, like the Blu-ray set, and so I'm
Mhm.
like, I'm not gonna watch this with like the HBO Max like, we will be right back, like commercial
Hmm.
break thing. I'm going to watch it all the way through. So I think those are set out in the production order, but that's kind of what I think that's the order that most people prefer. Like, it doesn't change anything like continuity wise, but I
Mhm.
think if you ever look up the production order, is kind of the way to go through it. That said, there's kind of a pros and cons to it, and this is for if anybody's listening, like, how do I watch Batman animated series? If you do the production order, it's probably the most smoothest continuity of the show, and you really get to watch the show kind of evolve and work out the kinks of itself, and work out the kind of like really find its own identity. But that means that those out of the first 25 episodes or so, there are a few that are going to be rough, as they're like, as they there's Batman vs is not totally like start to finish like perfect. There are a few episodes that you're like, okay, this doesn't feel like the show.
Mhm.
However, if you watch the broadcast order, you get the good and the bad are like sprinkled a lot more evenly out. And so I'd
Gotcha.
say,
Okay.
so those are the pros and cons for watching it each way. The real winner is just watching Batman the Animated Series, like, in general. You can't
Yeah.
go wrong in the long run. You can't go wrong with it. So
Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah, because I watched those first couple episodes. I'm like, all right, now I think I'm gonna sit down and do like a rewatch, like an official rewatch of this, because I'm really enjoying it again.
No, I think like I went to go grab the Blu-ray box, which was, I think it came out like almost a decade ago now. was like 12 Blu-ray disc, and like I was like, oh, the only thing that I really need is like what episodes are on what disc, and so like I looked it up and like printed out a sheet to stick in there. So I'm like, if there was a specific episode I need to find, I'll be able to locate it. All right, let's move on to the legacy of Batman the Animated Series. Obviously, we're still talking about it in 2026, but Daniel, do you still think that it holds up as a cartoon, and watching it as an adult as opposed to watching it as a kid, does it still have that like same awe for you?
Yeah, I think, I certainly think it still holds up. And I think watching it as an adult reveals a lot of like kind of pathos that as a kid was like a total mystery to me. I remember watching it as a kid and being like, man, people are, all these guys are sad. Like they're, a lot of the villains are like I think there's like a half dozen episodes that end with like the villain crying. And I'm
Yeah,
like, well,
they're pretty tragic figures.
that sucks for that guy, man. But or if they don't end with that, they end with like this weird emotional reckoning that you don't really have words for when you're a little kid. You're just like kind of watching this grand sweeping like adult emotions and certainly filtered through like comic book characters, but they're very like, adult emotions of like, terror and jealousy and anger and self-loathing and dismal defeat and hubris and all that. So yeah, I think it's definitely still worth going. And I also think that like, if you're like an animation fan, it's really cool to go back and just like look at the technique of it and look at how much went into like the background design and how much went into like the art deco of like the buildings and the architecture.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also like, like it's kind of become, it goes without saying, but like if there's anybody that knows how to like create like an effective superhero character design in less than like five pen strokes, it's Bruce Timm. That dude can draw. Like I know like I know that no one needs to be told that, but like if you like how easily and like he's able to create kind of like a silhouette for a character, and that like you get the character immediately. And like there's, he did not want to like replicate like overly detailed comic book designs, because they don't, as you'll watch in like some of the Marvel shows that try to do more like comic book accurate designs, and that are a little more like action figure looking. It's hard if you don't have the animation budget for that kind of thing, and it's hard if you don't have like the animation manpower, or if you're on like a quick schedule to like animate them in a way that like moves smoothly. That's really difficult. And so, the Batman the Animated Series character design ethos of like the less lines the better. Like you can see like Batman looks strong, but he doesn't have a lot of like muscle lines, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And if you like watch the X-Men, those guys are like ripped. They're just full of muscle lines, but they're the animation is not as smooth. And I know that X-Men was like not working with anywhere near the budget that Warner Brothers was working with Batman, but Batman really helped its case by being like Batman doesn't really need ab lines
Mm-hmm.
in every
Yeah.
shot. He needs to be able to look cool moving.
Right.
So that
Yeah.
was, I
These
think
like
that's,
swift, fluid like
yeah,
punches and kicks and
yeah, like the moving in the
whatnot.
shadows and stuff. And like the
Yeah.
less details you have, the less extraneous details, the better. So yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff that like if you haven't watched it as a kid or haven't watched it since you were a kid, there's a lot of stuff to get out of it no matter who you are. And if you're just like visiting for it as an adult, it's kind of like, I again, people can disagree. I think it's the greatest adventure cartoon of all time, and I think it is to adventure cartoons like what The Simpsons was to like, animated sitcoms, like early Simpsons was. It's just like so, it feels so definitive to its form and to the medium that I think, if you even if you go back to it and you're like, hey, I probably would have gotten more of this as a kid. Yeah, very likely, but I still think there's stuff to like enjoy about it, even if it's just appreciating like the massive impact it had on like, superheroes as a genre.
All right, and I guess like one of the things that people have thought about recently was that there was a new animated Batman series called The Caped Crusader that people were like championing as like maybe the new Batman animated series, kind of like how Disney Plus's X-Men 97 has done for that X-Men series of
Hmm.
the late 90s. I actually didn't even know that it had come out. I heard it kind of teased when it was in production, but Daniel, have you watched this show, and do you have an opinion, like if it like scratches that itch or comes close?
I have seen the show, and there's like a few episodes and a few like character ideas that I really like. I think my it's not Batman the Animated Series, and I part of that I think is indicative of the fact that with the animation industry right now, I don't think would allow any show to have the kind of resources it needs to have to be Batman the Animated Series. I think we're in an era for animation where a lot of it is like we're just doing the best with what we have. We don't really have like an early 90s like Warner Brothers Renaissance, which is, it's hard to do when like Warner Brothers is being like sold for parts. Like the copper's getting ripped out of the walls. So, but Cape Crusader is like good. If you go into it expecting Batman the Animated Series, I think you'll be disappointed. But if you go into it kind of like watching them like play around with ideas and like characters that have kind of been in the shadow of Batman the Animated Series for about 30 plus years now, I think it's like an interesting watch. And they do implement some good ideas. I wish that like I wish sometimes wish it was a little more cinematic, especially in like, the boarding and the framing and, just the aspirations of the show in general were a little more cinematic. But again, a lot of that has to do with the fact that like, even like a Batman cartoon is like fighting like an uphill battle with the people who, supposedly want to like air it. It's all like just like you can have this much money, do your best. And again, back talking about back in like the early 90s in Warner Brothers when you had like someone like Steven Spielberg being like, "We should have an orchestra. Why don't cartoons have an orchestra anymore?" And like Warner Brothers is like, "Give the man an orchestra." Because he was like executive produced a lot of stuff that later for like Tiny Toon Adventures that later became part of like Batman's production process, and you don't really have that anymore. You have less people in power that really enjoy animation and understand that like if you want good animation you have to provide the resources to let it happen. You can't just say like this will just be the new Batman cartoon and I hope people enjoy it and we're not going to put a lot into it. The creative team is very very passionate though, and I hope it does well. I really do. But sometimes I watch it and I'm like, I wish this got like the support that Batman the Animated Series did, because Batman the Animated Series doesn't have like it happens with people taking risks, but it also happens with an industry that's being geared to produce good work and promote talent. So
Well, that is very well said, Daniel, and thank you for spending time with us
no
today
problem.
and talk about Batman the Animated Series. Certainly, it was pivotal. It was incredible in my childhood and pivotal in my love and appreciation for Batman over the years. Before I pitch over to when and where listeners can buy the book, Evan, do you have final thoughts on the Batman animated series and what it's meant to you?
I mean, I've from what I've read of your book so far, it's reignited my love of the show, and it's made me want to rewatch the show, and makes me want to delve deeper into your book. Because your enthusiasm and your passion for the show, what it's meant to you personally, and what it represents artistically is palpable. Right from the opening description of the intro, the memorable nature of the intro, and how that kind of like blew you away as a kid. So yeah, I'm enjoyed this conversation, and I'm looking forward to reading the rest of your book.
Thank you. I'm really glad you're enjoying it. I'm really glad that like coming out of it, you're like want to watch it rather than be like, oh my gosh, I'm so tired of hearing about Batman the Animated Series. There's like because like every once in a while you read like there's a lot of good pop culture books out there, but every once in a while you read something about a show and you're like, I'm so tired of hearing about this show, no more. So hopefully that's one of my biggest goals is like hopefully it makes the show seem cool rather than like wow, it really took the wind out of the Batman animated series. It's kind of a chore to dive back into. So I'm glad about
Right.
that.
Yeah, it's not tearing away
Okay,
mystery. It's
good.
adding to the enjoyment of it. And from what I've read so far, also very like well paced in terms of the writing.
Thank you.
It feels like it's building a momentum as opposed to being like, here's a topic, let's go deep and let's be dense, and then like let's take another topic. It feels like it's got a natural flow and rhythm to it.
Thank you.
Well, Daniel, we're excited about the book. When and where can listeners purchase your book?
Like pretty much wherever books are sold. It comes out on September 1st of this year. And, if you want to get it like Bookshop or Barnes Noble or Amazon or order it through your local bookstore, that's always a great option. If you don't want or like can't, if you don't have the money for a copy, I get it because times is tough. Recommend it to like your local library and stuff. One thing about libraries is like not only are that like one of the greatest like you know tax funded resources that we have, but it's also
Amen.
like when they buy copies of books, that shows up for like authors. Like it's not like a library will order books based on like people being like rent checking them out, or like that, or people a lot of people wanting to check them out, or like a lot of people requesting that the book gets put into the library system, and that helps with sales too. So and it supports a valuable part of our communities. So yeah, I think any way you want to get it. I'm not like a book cop. I don't. It doesn't matter. Just like, or if you want to, the audiobook is being made right now. That should be fun. Get it on digital or Kindle or whatever.
Are you reading the book, or do you have a reader scheduled for that?
I'm not reading the book. I have I probably could, but I don't like it comes out every once in a while, but like first of all, I'm not like enamored with how I sound like on with on camera. And also like I grew up in like pretty like rural North Carolina, so
Hmm.
like every it'll like I'll probably be like exhausted like 15 pages into it, or like, and then I'll be like, and then the Batman went on to fight the Joker, and he went woohoo. It was I have a pretty the accent comes out every once in a while, so I was like, I'll spare Batman the Animated Series sounding like it's being yelled out of the back of a truck. So, so it'll be and luckily the narrator we have is fantastic. He's doing a great job.
Awesome. All right. Before we briefly talk about what we've been watching, we're going to pause for some station identification. You've been listening to the It's the Pictures podcast. You can follow the podcast at It's the Pick Pod or it's the pictures.bsky.social, or it might even be it's the pick pod.bsky.social. I don't know. Try them both.
One way or another, you'll track the show down.
Yeah, you can always email us. Tell us what is your favorite episode of Batman the Animated Series. Tell us about your thoughts about Black Panther 3 when you hear this episode.
If you're the one weirdo who thinks Batman in the animated series sucks, that would certainly be interesting.
Yeah, let us know. You could tell us this is the worst episode we've ever done. No one's ever going to say that. You could also find me on Blue Sky at maxcolville.com, or search my name, Max Colville. I'm also on Letterboxd, MH Colville. You can find the podcast also on Instagram and Letterboxd as well. Evan can be found at Real Recon, as in film reel, and he's available in most places, including his podcast, Spoiler Piece Theater, where they recently had not only an episode on the Odyssey, which we talked about recently, but also the Dink, which we'll be talking here about shortly. You can also read the newsletter at www.itsthepictures.com, which continues the conversations that we have here, as well as other things. I've had some recent reviews there. I think Thursday I talked about the rush to see the Odyssey in 70 millimeter, and why it's been so hard to get a ticket, and why there's only like 30 projectors capable of playing the film in the world, which is just madness. Daniel, where can people find you?
Everywhere. It's you can find me. I'm mostly on like Blue Sky these days. If you look up Daniel Dockery, you'll find me there. If you look me up on like Instagram, I'm sure you'll find me there. It really depends on your choice. Like there are some social media platforms that I'm not around very much. Like if you look for me on Threads, I'm not gonna like I'm there, but I'm not like not
There.
there. And
Yeah.
like you can find me on like X, but it's just like a ghost town of like where I used to live before that place got ruined.
Ransacked.
Yeah, exactly. It was yeah. You can find me everywhere, but like Blue Sky's probably like the main place.
All right. Okay, let's go into what we've been watching. I'll take the lead here first and talk a little bit about the Jackie Chan box set from Arrow Video that came out like a month or so ago. And when you're listening to this podcast, you would be able to get it for 50% off at Barnes& and Noble because they're having an Arrow Video physical media sale. This box set includes maybe the last of Jackie Chan's Hong Kong output before coming to America. He did this film Drunken Master 2, which is very highly acclaimed in his filmography. It's a pretty great movie that exists on its own outside of Drunken Master 1 and has a lot of the slapstick comedy that Chan would be known for, as well as the multiple different martial arts techniques, and has like a last 20-minute like fighting sequence that is quite memorable. Then the next movie in the box set that I watched was his big American breakthrough was Rumble in the Bronx, which I'm sure most people remember seeing that cover of Rumble in the Bronx with big Jackie Chan in the city.
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea that this movie was going to be as silly as it turned out to be.
So silly.
Yeah. Basically, Chan is visiting one of his uncles who owns like a convenience store, and everything seems to be going good. The uncle's going to sell the convenience store and get married to this young lady, and the lady's like, "Oh, this is such a good deal. What could be wrong here?" And it seems like there's like a gang that asks for like security money like all the time, like to make sure that they don't ransack her store. Yeah, and he gets involved with that group and has to like fight his way through them. And even like ultimately, like he kind of like makes friends with them at one point. I'm like, how could he ever? And they go up against like an even bigger bad. And yeah, it's just like really enjoyable. It's wildly entertaining. There's four other movies in the set, including like Who Am I, Thunderbolt, A Police Story 4, and one other movie that's escaping me right now. But all six are in 4K. Really great work as always from Arrow, and I highly recommend checking it out. Do either of you? I'll start Daniel. Daniel, do you have any history of Jackie Chan?
Yeah, I as any fan of like martial arts films, I loved Jackie Chan. I was recently rewatching the Criterion release of like the first two, I think the first two Police
Mhm.
Story movies, and just again as like marveling how that dude's like didn't like die like 9,000 times.
I know.
Just like every there's a period of like Jackie Chan's life where like you're watch him almost die on screen like at least like 10 times per movie, and you're like, geez, this guy. But he's so fantastic, and when the right filmmakers involved, they can really channel his like charisma into something like special. So yeah, I like Jackie Chan.
Yeah, I think like a big thing of it, like, and I did some writing on Police Story 1 a while back, is that it looks like he's like almost channeling like silent film
Hmm.
comedians with some of his physical comedy as well as his martial arts. Evan, what do you have something to say about Jackie Chan?
Well, I've seen his English output. I'm ashamed to say I haven't seen his earlier work, but yeah, I remember Rumble in the Bronx being pretty silly, pretty fun. I remember the ladder fights. I remember he also famously broke his ankle in the middle of making the movie and
Hmm.
was like wearing a boot but like a sock over the boot that made it look like he was wearing a sneaker, and just kept doing all of the stunts in it, which is like mind-blowing. And like Daniel said, every movie I've seen some of the stunts that like almost killed him, like the one where he like it usually like falls through a roof or something and electrocuted himself and like broke his pelvis or something. Like it's insane to me that he has survived as many things as he has. But like, it's like a lot of people I think are quick to write off martial arts movies or action movies in general, but you have someone like Jackie Chan who's very talented on many levels, but also like he's drawing that rich inspiration, like you're saying, Max, from like silent films and silent film stunt stars. And so it's really that much more interesting when you're like looking at it through that lens as well, seeing like both the work that he's doing but also like the influence he's pulling from in the greater like film history.
Hmm. Daniel, have you been watching anything lately?
Yeah, I'm working on my follow up to I Am the Night. Like, it's not a sequel or anything, it's just the next book. And this one is about kind of the creation of Jurassic Park and like the big dinosaur renaissance of the late 20th century. So I've not only been like going back and reading like every single Michael Crichton book, but I've watched so many dinosaur movies, which are like run the spectrum of like these like really amazing like Ray Harryhausen movies where the creatures feel like they're alive on screen to like some of the like cheapest films I've ever seen. Um and but they're all like, I don't know, I'm just like, I love dinosaur movies as a kid. And so it's fascinating getting to like rewatch like I remember like as a kid being like, you know, it's a really good movie, The Land Unknown, 1958, Land Unknown. And I'm rewatching, I'm like, oh, maybe this movie's not as good as like 6-year-old me thought it was. But then there's like, I like there's movies like Ray Harryhausen did the special effects for this movie called The Valley of Guanji, about like these people like go out into like this like Mexico desert, like this big canyon system, and they found like an
Mm.
Allosaurus and like a whole ecosystem of dinosaurs. And I remember as like a kid, I was like, this is a dinosaur movie. But now I watch it with like tears streaming down my face, like, oh, this is art. This is pure art. And so it's been fun. It's been fun getting to revisit a lot of
It,
stuff like that.
is Godzilla a dinosaur? Did you
Godzilla's
draw the line? Or...
Godzilla's absolutely a dinosaur. That is a
Okay.
dinosaur through and through. I'm not watching all of them for this, but it's really I know that Spielberg loved Godzilla, and Godzilla does that kind of meeting of a biological and a technical clash that Jurassic Park does as well.
Hmm.
Where Godzilla, you have a dinosaur that's basically been reawakened by like nuclear testing, and you have all like the hubris of mankind delving into atomic testing and all this stuff versus like this like nightmare creature that's also like this harbinger of like both human suffering and like its own suffering and stuff. So there's a lot of stuff to dive into there. But yeah, long story short, Godzilla absolutely a dinosaur.
Do you have some thoughts on the Dink? Maybe I can add thoughts to at the end because I play pickleball, right? So
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, the I watched the new Apple TV Plus comedy, The Dink, starring Jake Johnson. He plays a washed-up tennis star who is working at his. He's working for the tennis club his dad Ed Harris is like running, and he's down on his luck, and Ed Harris is like, "Oh, this pickleball is going to be a real problem. It's really like a threat to tennis. We got to like basically like throw some arcane club rules out there and like challenge the pickleball people to like a tennis duel because that's the only way we can stop them from taking over the club." And so Jake Johnson initially thinks like, "Oh, I'm like a former tennis pro. Of course my dad's gonna pick me." Like, no, no, he's not. And he gets injured, so he starts playing pickleball at his doctor Ben Stiller's recommendation, and he meets Mary Steenburgen, who he plays pickleball with, and he actually has a lot of fun hanging out with her and playing. And so it's about him like discovering that he really likes pickleball, and from there you can imagine probably the directions that it goes in. It's a fun comedy. It's very much in the vein of sports comedies like Dodgeball. So it's kind of like got a goofy quality. It doesn't quite have like the same like ensemble as you have in Dodgeball, but you've got Ben Stiller in there. You have Ed Harris. You have some other like comedic actors that get thrown in there. You have Andy Roddick playing himself. He's like, so Jake Johnson's character is like, oh, he was my rival, and it's like, no, he never never. It's like they played one match and he lost very badly to him, so they like pull that out. Yeah, it's a good time. It's not like amazing, but I found it pretty funny and enjoyable and a good, escape for an hour and a half or so.
as for myself, so I was like, there needed to be more pickleball in this movie. There's
Yeah.
there's an awful lot of like country music, Evan, and there's
Yes.
awful lot of like elderly retired woman wish fulfillment of like 40-year-old guy falls for you.
I mean, I guess so. I mean, he falls for her and she's like, I'm not attracted to you. He's like, oh, all right. this is awkward. But I like Mary Steenburgen. I think she's funny, and I enjoy seeing her. So I was like, okay, I'm down with this. But I'm sad there wasn't enough pickleball for your taste, Max.
No, no, but no, it's a cute movie, and I think that's the director who's doing what the Spaceballs 2 movie, right? So
I think so. Yeah.
yeah. All right. Well, I think that just wraps it up for this episode of It's the Pictures. Daniel, I'd like to thank you very much for joining us and talking with us about your book. I Am the Night, and I look forward to holding the physical copy in my hand once my order comes in. It was something that I've been looking forward to a long time since I love the series, and excited to dive into it. Evan, thanks as always for joining the episode, and we'll be back again in 2 weeks' time. Thank you.
See ya.